welcome to another Coaching Loop podcast. Hello, Nick. How are you?
I'm great, Alan. Fantastic. I've got to share with you, and I know you don't let me do this generally. You may edit it out, but you don't like me saying good morning or good afternoon because it puts us in a place and time, which is not good for the sequence of the podcast. But I've just been to my first festival, my first music festival, and it made me realise just how mired my music taste is in the past, in the 80s, because a band came on called Faithless, and I said to somebody, who's this modern rubbish? And they said they've been going 20 years.
Well, let's crack on. We've got a fantastic person coming in to speak to us today, Paula Day. Paula, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you know better than us who you are, what you are, and a bit about you. And then I'll leave Nick to do the normal teacher recap that we do, and then we'll get into it. So, Paula, welcome to Coaching Loop podcast. Fantastic to have you on board. And we're dialing into you from Singapore, which is super excited, but you are the second overseas person we've had. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here. This is my first ever podcast. So if I stuff it up a little bit here and there, just bear with me. I live in Singapore. I've been here about 22 years. I've lived in a few different countries. For the last sort of 25 years, I've worked in OD, organizational design development roles, both as an individual contributor, as a manager of managers for quite a number of multinational companies based here in Singapore, and focused specifically on leadership development, people development as well, not just leaders, but people development. And that led me into team development, because a lot of the focus in the companies I worked at was around the performance of teams. And we all know that lovely phrase, high performing teams. The question is really, what does it really mean and how do we really achieve it? And just as a little sideline, I do quite a lot of coaching as well. People, all different levels. I'm mentoring a very young person in Hong Kong at the moment on a pro bono basis, trying to help him work his career out. And then I work with up to, managers, directors, CEOs. And I absolutely love that individual conversation and the development it brings as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Paula. So I'll ask you the standard 3 questions, which we do as a kind of teacher's recap of previous people's experiences. What inspired you, or who inspired you to get into that coaching? That's one of the questions. And you can choose which ones you answer. What is your metaphor for coaching that kind of describes you? And are there any models that you follow or use that really help you, or not?
Ooh. Do you want me to answer all 3 or just one?
Totally up to you.
So I think, how did I get into coaching? I think it just kind of naturally happened from the development side of having one-on-one conversations with people and trying to help them find that light bulb switch for themselves. I went and trained as a coach because I just felt I would feel more confident if I had the structure of a coach training within which to have those conversations, because we all talk about holding the space, and that space is very precious and very important to the individuals. The third question, models. I've forgotten the second one already. Third question on models. I actually use an awful lot of frameworks because I find in a lot of my coaching that it's not just asking questions. People are looking for ideas. And so I use different frameworks within which to encourage people to think about themselves and their own development. So the drama triangle, for example, if you're familiar with the drama triangle, I use that quite often when people are getting stuck in certain relationships within their work environment, to try and help them understand what roles are they playing, what roles do they need to play. So I could sit here and talk all the podcast about models because I love them, but I do use them, and I use them judiciously in my coaching conversations. And I've forgotten the second question.
You haven't. I think you partly answered it because you offered a lovely metaphor for how you got inspired to come to coaching, talking about helping people find their own light bulb switch.
Yes.
So maybe that is an indication of the kind of metaphor that describes you as a coach.
I think that is it. I get the most pleasure out of somebody sitting and going, oh my goodness, now I see what I need to do. Now I finally find a way forward. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to take that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm the light bulb switch for you.
I have to stop Alan with all his metaphors. He has one every single meeting we ever have. And the most recent one was a bucket with grains of sand and rocks in it. And I'm not quite sure whether I'm the bucket or a rock, but I might be a grain of sand. So let's dive into
the light bulb. Could well be that it's on a dimmer switch. You can dial it up and dial it down. Sorry, see where my brain goes.
Don't apologize. I love it. Am I feeling a bit okay? We're going off down a rabbit hole now, but yeah, I like that. I'm going to take that away and think about how do I incorporate that.
There we go.
So you talked about high performance teams, and they are something that Alan and I both work in as well, because we both do teamwork as well as one-to-one coaching. Can you just kind of share some of the challenges of that as a coach, and some of the opportunities? And if there's anything that you've just touched on in terms of the way you use your models and frameworks, if any of those particularly work in a coaching or team scenario, I'd be really interested to hear a bit about that.
If it's okay with you, I'm just going to take a little bit of a step back and tell you how I got into what we call team coaching, because when I started doing this work, the language of team coaching didn't really exist. And it was always around high-performing teams. So for me, in the corporate journey, it started off with, I need my team to be performing better. I need them to be a high-performing team. As an OD practitioner, part of what we would be asked to do is to come in and work with a team to look at how are they interacting, what are the things that they need to be doing slightly better as a team. And so a lot of that actually started as facilitation, because what most leaders in the corporate space ask for is a workshop. And as you both probably know, they want a workshop that's short and sweet and fits into their 2-day offsite, along with all the other business work that they're doing. And the challenge I encountered as I stepped into that space is we can create an amazing 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour experience for those people in the room, but it's not sustainable as a team. There might be some wonderful nuggets that individuals take away with them, but the ability for that team to journey with that experience is very limited if you do a kind of one and done in a short period of time.
And I think that's highlighting the difference between high performance and high performing. The high performance of a team might be down to the individuals, or as you say, little nuggets, or people evolve in little areas. Whereas high performing is a group of people coming together and increasing their level as a group.
So you've really highlighted an important point, Alan, which is, when is a team and when is it a group, and what is the difference? And you can Google it. There's lots and lots of materials out there on the difference between a group and a team. And to really differentiate very simply between them, in a group, individuals tend to have their own individual goals. They might have a common purpose, but they have their own individual goals, and their interdependence is less. Whereas in a team, they generally are coming together because they have a common goal that they all need to work together towards. So a really good analogy would be if we're having a potluck supper. That's a group activity because everybody brings their own individual food. Whereas if we're going to cook a meal together, we have to work together, and everybody has an individual job that contributes to the overall meal that we're producing. So one of the challenges in performance is, are we expecting performance from a group when we think it should really be a team? Do we always really need a team if we're looking for the performance? And how, that comes back to how do we define performance? So one of the things I did find is that we're not very good at defining when we need a group and why a group is beneficial versus when we need a team and why that's beneficial in that particular situation.
And do you think teams and groups are needed for different things? So it might be even a time scale that we need to put a group together to go get a project across the line in the next 6 months. And then you can go disperse again and take a few things away. But we need a team to do a longer 5-6 years worth of work to achieve a bigger vision or contribute to a bigger vision, knowing that we'll have people going out and people coming in and assuming slightly different roles or embedding their personalities within that team, that makes the whole and the collective better, whatever better is for that team.
So that could be one way to think about group versus team. To me, it's a little more complicated in terms of the definition and what it does do, which leads us into that whole concept of, coaching a team. Is we need to have a conversation around what is this group of people coming together in service of? Why are we here and what are we trying to achieve? And how do we then go about achieving it? The upside of a group is very often you can get a lot more creativity, because in a group, you're then embracing the differences and the different ideas, and people are not feeling tied to the norms of the common goal of a team. So one of the most important things is really to think about at this point of time, would a group approach be more beneficial versus a team approach? And then how do we define and clarify that so we're all very clear that this is a group activity versus a team? And that leads us into the thinking then, well, what is it that we need to make this work? And so, there's a huge amount of work out there on the research of what makes a high-performing team, if we talk about a team, and it's horribly complicated. And I know this because in 2020, I was working at a company called VMware, which doesn't exist anymore. It got bought by Broadcom. And of course, it was the COVID year, and a lot of the work that we were doing face-to-face just dialed down, and people were trying to come to terms with, how do I work remotely? And so there was a little bit of extra time in the OD space. And I started to research the research on high-performing teams. And I was really fortunate I had, the permission to do that from my manager in Palo Alto. And what I wanted to do was really understand what's common across all of this research, what's common across the definition of what's needed to be a high-performing team. And it took me about 3 months to trawl through all the different research, things like Google's Project Aristotle, the Atlassian Playbook, Sandy Pentland's MIT work, which is absolutely fascinating, Gartner, all of the consultants out there. There's just swaths of it, and everyone is slightly different. So what I did without AI, because we didn't have an AI tool then to use, was really look at what was common. And the things that came out that were common across high performance in what they defined as a team environment, but I think this could apply in a group as well, was number one was communication. The type and way that we communicate as a group of people. The second one was purpose and goals, having common purpose and then having very clear goals. Identity and brand as a team. Who are we as a team? How do we describe ourselves? What are the expectations of the people outside, and how do we manage that as a team? Roles and responsibilities within the team. And then the fifth one was what I called ways of working practices. And that links back into how often are we coming together as a team? How do we share information? How do we challenge each other? How do we make decisions? How do we support each other, even though we've got roles and responsibilities? What are the practices that we would put in place and agree to commit to as a team that then reinforce everything that we're trying to do? With that, you then have to have quite a lot of conversations to work all of that out, because you can't have just one of those five. You need all five. That's what the research really showed me.
And I guess that's you going to being that facilitator person / coach that can facilitate those questions and coach those solutions or answers moving forward.
Absolutely. And, this then gets you into the challenge between facilitation and coaching. How do you educate the team on all of this? Can you just step right straight into coaching, or do you need to do a little bit of anchoring of the theory or the frameworks or the models, as we talked about earlier, Nick, so that they're comfortable with those as tools and as lenses through which to then look at themselves as a team. And that's what I found actually you needed to do. You couldn't jump straight into a pure coaching conversation. You needed to have some common understanding and facilitate that common understanding. Co-creating it was the most important thing. So purpose, for example, team purpose is a very common one that I've done a huge amount of work with teams on, helping them understand what a purpose is versus a mission statement versus a vision statement, for example, is a very common area that we need to unpack. Getting comfortable with the leader on how that purpose can be defined, can it be fully co-created by the team versus does the leader have some particular ideas that they want embedded in that purpose, the language of it, where it sits relative to everything else that's going on in the organization. Once you've identified the process of getting that, then you can sit down, do the work to create a draft purpose, and then you can have a coaching conversation with the team to then think about how do we really commit to this? Why wouldn't we commit to this? Where would we use it? How is this going to help us? What would stop us from really feeling like this is our common purpose as a whole team? So I hope that answers a little bit of the question for you, Alan.
Oh, absolutely, Paula. Thank you. And so thank you that you've replaced AI to do all that research for us. I've made copious notes, and they do really resonate with me as a facilitator coach with groups or with individuals. But I've got a question for you. This sounds very complex, and the one and done phrase you used before, I'm going to hang on to that. I love that, one and done. This doesn't suit one and done at all, does it? It's
No.
the opposite. And to try to get buy-in from clients to invest the proper time in this, as you've described, is a challenge for the coaching industry, isn't it? What I'm really interested to hear is if you think about communication, identity, and what do we want as our goals for our group, our team. We can see that translate across in a one-to-one coaching scenario, very similar, can't we? But what are the complications of managing conversations and facilitating workshops where you've got to get a group of people to be vulnerable, to be open, to share their personalities, and break down some of that hierarchy, because you may have bosses and direct reports in the same room, often is the case, isn't it? How do you do that as a facilitator, as a coach, to make the conversations and their communication really effective, really on point, so that you can get to that deeper thinking on what do we want?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. So a couple of things. One is I was very fortunate to find leaders in the organizations I worked in who were willing to embrace the concept of a journey as opposed to a single event. So you had to find the leaders who were willing to commit to this. The other thing then was to make sure that they understood that your job was to facilitate some process education and some knowledge education, to then coach some conversations with the team, but in the process of doing that, to encourage the team to own it themselves. And this kind of links a little bit into the systemic team coaching approach that Peter Hawkins talks about. He differentiates between just a team coaching versus a systemic team coaching. And systemic team coaching is very much around looking at the ecosystem in which the team is operating and making sure then that they're looking at how they are within the system in which they work.
And I think on top of that as well as systemic constellations of how they influence each other as well, whether they're moving towards someone, away from someone, and how that then influences dynamics of everybody else within that ecosystem, to use your word. And I love ecosystems, and I love it as a framework in terms of micro, meso, and macro. I'm fascinated by that dynamic and that dynamic shift, or that constellation and that constellation shift, because of one decision or one person's decision, or someone leaving and someone coming in, and how it affects that whole constellation.
It's absolutely true. And in fact, the thing is, I often quote, when I'm doing this work with teams, I start with a quote from Andrew Grove, who was the CEO of Intel. And he wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. and I'm going to read it to you. So he says, success breeds complacency. Complacency breeds failure. Only the paranoid survive. A corporation is a living organism. It has to continue to shed its skin. Methods have to change. Focus has to change. Values have to change. The sum total of these changes is transformation. I anchor always around the fact that we can't sit still as a team because the environment that we're operating in is changing and we, the team, are changing. And so how do you cope with that as a team? Well, one of the things is communication. So when you talked about the interactions within an ecosystem, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at the work of Sandy Pentland from the MIT Multimedia Lab. He also runs his own research company called Human Dynamics. He did some amazing work on how do you measure, you're going to love this, a high-performing team. So teams are often measured by their KPIs. How much have you sold? How much have you saved? What's the productivity level? What's the efficiency level? But what Sandy Pentland had said was that's not actually measuring the team. All that's doing is measuring the output, and that output could be because of 3 out of the 7 members of the team. So he designed wearable tech, and this, he's doing this back in 2010, 2009, wearable tech that monitors the tone of your voice, not the words, but the tone, the volume, how often you're speaking. And it also, when there was a lot of worked in face-to-face, and it would measure your body, which way were you turning when you were talking to somebody. Used that data to plot the interactions, communication interactions between the people in teams, and found that the teams that had the highest cross interactions within their ecosystem had the highest output as a team and were more engaged and more energized. And they used this to find teams, what he called teams within a team. So where there was a team where maybe only 3 of the people were having those, what we call those little side conversations and the little cliques, that was having a negative impact on the communication with the rest of the team. And when you can show that, you can then say to the team, how do you address that? How do you fix it? He also found, I think it was a call center in a bank, that when the informal conversations are even more important than the formal conversations, so that social interaction that we have, ideally face-to-face. And of course, this was 2009, long before COVID, but that when people got together and got to know each other better and had those little side conversations, productivity went up. And so one of the things that the call center did was they put all their coffee breaks on at exactly the same time, which was unheard of for a call center, and then there was nobody on the lines. But their productivity rates went up significantly after they started doing that, because of the fact that people were getting to know each other and they were sharing information. And his tech was able to track all of that. Absolutely fascinating. So that leads us into, so how can we emulate that when we haven't got the tech to measure it? And how do we then continue to measure productivity and output of a team? Because to your earlier question, Nick, how do you get buy-in from a leader to do the work and for the team to do the work when they're so busy with everything else? So there are companies out there. I worked with a company called Rallybright, RALLYBRIGHT. I'll give them a little plug. Amazing company in the US, very small. And they built a platform where you can basically get the team to answer questions, and it measures the resilience of the team and the engagement of the team. And you can pulse the team on a regular basis. So I've worked with leaders who've done this over a 2-year period. You can then look at where are the scores going up, where are they going down, what's shifting, because there's 45 measures, 45 questions. Something's always going to be at the bottom. But you can now look at that data and map it in real time to what is happening in the team. Have we had a change of people? Have we had a change of portfolio? Have we had more transformation happening within the organization? How's it affecting the outcomes? And you can then use that data to have a conversation with the team around what do you as a team need to be doing better? What do you want to focus on? What difference would it make if you could get a better score on that particular question? So that type of platform has been very helpful for leaders who want metrics and data. And because I worked in a lot of tech organizations who are always interested in the data, it doesn't solve all the problem. It just gives you some lovely data on which to then be able to have a neutral, psychologically safe conversation with the team around what might not be working as a team. And you can link it to results as well. And we definitely saw a shift.
Also, going back to the coaching and facilitation, it's very rare that you can almost quantify change through coaching or facilitation, or, you know, as you said, in terms of one and done, you can have an impact in the very, very short term, but change and development and evolvement is a different kettle of fish. But if you're able to do those quantitative data analysis over a period to time B, to time C, to time D, there is this quantifiable shift rather than a subjective, well, we know it's better, but we can't tell you why. Or we know it's really helping us, but I can't really put my finger on it, what it is. So yeah, that's a lovely, lovely way of kind of measuring that.
And Nick asked a question earlier as well about how do you basically enable people in a team to be vulnerable, to be able to have some of those conversations that you then need to have as a result of being able to look at data, like the Rally Bright data, where, you know what, we're not doing this very well as a team. How do we get comfortable to talk about that without pointing the fingers, for example, or without feeling like, you know, I'm going to have to share stuff that I'm not willing to share. And so part of the work that I would do, Nick, would be, and this often comes back to, if we're coaching a team, do we coach the leaders separately or having coaching conversation with the leader around their role? Are they in the team or on the team in certain situations? But one of the things was always to encourage the leader to be the first person to be vulnerable in a room. And so one of the processes that I did use, one of the frameworks that I used, was the River of Life leadership story, where a leader basically draws, and this is done very deliberately, but they draw the story of their life where the bends of the river are showing the key decision points across their whole life, not just work, that they had to make. And they talk about how difficult it might have been to make that decision and what they had to do to be able to make the decision and how it informed the person that they are today. And you will find very quickly that leaders who are comfortable to do that and the ones who are really uncomfortable to do that. But I have observed through practical experience that if the leader leads with that and then the team follow, and they don't do it all at once because everybody would be totally bored of the stories by the end of the day, but they build it in as one of their ways of working practices so that over time, everybody shares a story through their river of life. That broke down an awful lot of those barriers and debunked a lot of assumptions that people had about other people. And especially here in Asia, where you've got that layer of culture sitting on top. And we often interpret the way that people are from our own cultural lens and forget about it's actually coming from their cultural lens. I will say I've seen great men cry in a room as a result of doing this activity with each other, where they suddenly realized, I never knew you like I know you now as a result of you sharing this story. So I'm just using that, Nick, as one example. And I know there's lots of other team exercises or facilitated interventions that you can do to help break down that vulnerability. The second thing is to then encourage them to co-create, and this is where you really coach them as a group, to co-create a set of values and behaviors, well, really behaviors, I would say, not so much underpinned by values, but a set of concrete behaviors that encourage psychological safety, lack of judgment, sharing within that team, so that becomes part of their team norms and they commit to it. The most important thing is that they discuss it and share it And if you coach them as a coach, and this is a really good example for a team coaching intervention, to really challenge, what's being said in the room, not challenge each other, but challenge the biases or some of the norms that are coming out, and also unpack some of the cultural aspects. That can be incredibly powerful, because when they've co-created it as a team and they've committed to it, it then becomes much easier for them, for example, to call each other out, or to disagree with each other. So if you think about some of the basic team behaviors that people don't want to step into, either culturally or just personally, they're nervous about, that kind of work can really help them break that barrier.
I think also within that, something that I've been professing a little bit more and more is calling in. As much as we call out, we give permission to call in. So if someone is exhibiting those behaviors or those values or whatever, it's also safe to call them in, which is, and Nick and I sat here as two British people. I find it's easier for British people to call people out than it is to call them in, if that makes sense. And I know, going back to the cultural thing, there will be other cultures around the world that will find it easier to call people in for when they do something well, or overly well than they shouldn't have done, or gone beyond where they should have gone, rather than just calling people out.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And celebration. So, are we celebrating our achievements? Are we celebrating the individuals in the team? Is part of, again, that ways of working practices. What are we doing on a regular basis? Not just, it's the end of the year, we need to celebrate the end of the year, but how do we regularly find a way to comfortably, without overdoing it? So I love that. I love that call it in as the counterbalance to calling it out.
Paula, we met at the EMCC conference, and part of that work we did was to try some walking coaching in the outside. And I'm quite experienced with this, and I really enjoyed the session I did with my buddy. And during that walk, she said, Nick, what is your kind of metaphor for who you are as a coach? And I said, well, I want people to, and I looked at the wood and I said, to see the tree for the woods, to get that perspective. And she asked a really interesting question. She said, what do you think is the tree that you see that other people don't, because the light is hitting it? And that's a really interesting question, a really nice way of looking at that kind of metaphor. The question to you is that, as a coach, you want people to find their own light switch and to switch their light bulbs on. But in a group, that's highly complicated, because perspectives can be so diverse, can't they? And they can be so inaccurate or grounded or confused. We've all worked with teams where sometimes you worry because one of them seems to pick up on an insight they think they've had, and you worry that it might be going in a direction that isn't healthy for the group. And I can recall a senior leader once saying, right, our weakness, boss, you've got all the skills and all the preferences. We should just be doing what you say, because as a team we're weak, but you've got all the key preferences. And I thought, no, please, no, this is not what we want. So how do you help people switch their light bulbs, find their light switches in a way that works for a group without diluting down other people's insights and their perspectives, and lots of trees having light landing on them in a wood and people not seeing the trees and just keep seeing the wood?
You know what, I love that question that she asked you, because it's a really good way to remind ourselves that perspectives are different based on where we are, what our experiences are. So a couple of things come to mind. One is behaviorally. So I have a very, very favorite saying that I use in team environments as well as individual environments, which is, my intention is my reality. My behavior is your reality. And when we put that up, so sometimes in a team coaching environment, if I'm noticing that there's a little bit of, kind of body language, or somebody is responding unconsciously to something that's being said, I will put this up. I'll just go, and one of the beautiful things about being a coach is that you can hit, pause. We're going to have a little pause here. just to give us a little bit of a framework around which to think about how we manage what's just been said. And you can put whatever it is that you're using up. So that's one that I use. The other thing I often encourage people to think about is the what assumptions are we making? And, you know, the spiral down into what's true and what's not true. And there's lots of different models for that, but I basically will often ask people to remember it's okay to say, so in that particular description, what do we know is true? What's a fact? And then what are we potentially making up, unintentionally making up? And when you put it in a way where people understand it's normal, it's the way our brains work. So there's a little bit of linking back to the way, you know, all of this is normal, by the way. I think that's really important. It's not intentional. It's just the way our brains work. It might be language. So unpacking that with people and framing a conversation that they can then continue to have with each other can often help with that. The other thing is to, I do another exercise where I encourage them to build a practice where everybody gets to give one piece of feedback on what's just been said, only one. I have used talking sticks in the room, and I have these. You're going to laugh. Everybody laughs, but then they want to steal them from me. I have those glitter sticks where they're probably about 12 inches long, hard plastic with gel inside with little glittery stars and color, like a little bit of color. And when you turn it, I've timed it. I think it's about 55 seconds. And I say to people, right, your turn. We're going to take turns to speak. Everybody gets 55 seconds. Pass it along once you've finished. So either you give one piece of feedback, literally one piece of feedback, and the person says, thank you very much. The person being receiving the feedback, because feedback's a gift, so you appreciate it. You don't have to act on it in the moment. So there's different techniques that you can use to encourage people to speak up more or to challenge each other. And I love to also introduce the concept of debate. So I have actually taught teams how to debate, because they often feel like, oh, we're going to have an argument or a disagreement. And culturally, that can feel very uncomfortable. But if we are comfortable with the idea of a debate as a safe process in which to share differing opinions and challenge each other, but challenge each other factually, that can often help as well. So those are just a few ideas, Nick, and it really will depend on the maturity of the team, where they are on in their journey when you're in the room with them. Sometimes you can just give them a little reminder and step back and let them do the work. Sometimes you need to reframe in the moment to make it safe. But I think as a coach, you have to be really comfortable to call it out if nobody in the room is calling it out, to do that reset. I think that is part of your job as a coach. When we coach one-on-one, sometimes we have to reset our clients. If they're going off on a tangent, we have to bring them back to the conversation they asked to have. Or if they're going down into context too much and it's not taking them anywhere, you often have to pull them back. So I would use that same approach in a team coaching environment.
Thank you, Paula. That's really, really, really useful. And what resonates there with me is the kind of deep-seated need to respect people on a journey, because it isn't a one and done. And to do what you're describing sounds so lovely in terms of actually respecting those people, giving them a voice, giving them the space, the safe space to be able to explore things that they collectively need to do together. But you kind of explained what one of my questions was going to be to you. How do you make things bespoke yet team bespoke? And I think you've done that, because by focusing on, and it resonates with me, the classrooms in schools where I worked for years, that setting out what the ways of working are at the start, and how it's non-judgmental, and you don't laugh at each other, and you give people space to time. And we might pass a ball around a circle, but the idea of a glitter stick that's got 55 seconds with an adult is even better, because I can imagine that adults will be much more likely to talk over 55 seconds than a child would on average. So I think you've really helped me to understand your ways of working and the ways of working that we can use in facilitation and group coaching. I'm going to now start to, and I do this, I look at the clock and I start to bring things together and I always do it selfishly. What have I learned from the podcast and what will I take away as things that I've highlighted with my pink highlighter to go away and do some more reading and thinking about? I love your very, very humble phrase. And you may not have chosen the words particularly carefully, but I wrote them down straight away because you said, I've observed through practice. And I love that phrase. It shows real humility. I know something, I'm going to share it with you, but actually I've observed it through practice. So I really like that phrase. So thank you for sharing that with us. I don't like the one and done. So the fact that the idea of a journey, whether you're walking through trees or you're walking through rooms trying to find a light switch, that really resonates with me. I've got some reassurance that some of the things that me and Alan are talking about at the moment with a strategic partner for AI is right at the right time, because some of the technology you're talking about to measure things that in the past haven't been very measurable, communication structures, for example, that's really encouraging that there's going to be tools out there that we can all use to help our clients in this very complicated structure, move forwards. Yeah, and I want to get some of those glitter sticks.
That's your big takeaway from this, Nick.
Well, I've still got the festival in my head, so they were glow sticks, but you know what? It's in my head. So thank you, Paula. Really enjoyed that. I've taken a lot from that.
Welcome, most welcome,
Paula. We're going to have to wrap this up just because we're trying to keep these relatively short. We will definitely have you back for a second, if not third, if not fourth, if you're willing to do that. Now you've now you've broken the back of your first ever podcast, and hopefully we made it quite okay for you and easy going, relatively speaking. But it's been fascinating, and I've taken 4 pages of notes out of this already. I just liked all of that around. I have a saying very similar, and I know there's certain people who'll be listening to this that will laugh when I say it, that there's no such thing as common sense, there's only rare sense, because what's common sense to me is rare to someone else. So my intention is my reality, I think, kind of sums that up even in a nicer package than mine. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm going to take away from this is my intention is my reality. And I think then combine that with the communication of explaining what my intention is as much as what my biases influence my reality as well. So I think that's amazing. And I'd love to explore more with you at some point about coaching debate. I think that would be fascinating to explore as well. So yeah, there's a couple of things that have got me hooked, and there's a couple that will get you back for a second series when we decide to
it worked. I want to thank you. I mean, we've kind of meandered our ways through what I think is actually quite a complex topic. And when you asked me to come, I was like, where do we start? I actually wrote it down, where to start. And you beautifully kicked it off by asking some questions. And I'm very conscious we haven't talked a lot specifically about the coaching of a team. And that's intentional because to me, there's a lot of other work that needs to happen around for the coaching to then be effective, as opposed to just diving in, I'm going to coach a team together. There's a lot more behind the scenes that needs to be done. So I hope that came across as we were talking.
So let's wrap up. Paula, thank you so much. I knew you'd be a great guest, and I was right. So yay to me. Thank you so much, Paula. I knew you'd be a great guest. Thank you so much.
Most welcome.